Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Friedman, for that very engaging talk. And we have a stack of some great questions here from the audience and from some of our members that submitted online. And so we'll, without further ado, jump right into it. First question comes from a student at Riverdale High School. In a world where terrorists like ISIS can attribute power to social media, what does the future of terrorism and war look like in an increasingly globalized world, and how can the U.S. adapt to combat that?
Oh. It's a really good question. Next question, please. Well, there's so many ways. Obviously, there's security things we need to do, and I'm not an expert on those, and I think they're pretty well known, but I am going to tell you a story because it happened at this theater last time I was here, and I never forgot it. It's the best question I have ever got on book tour, and I've been on book tour since 1989. And a man stood up there. Those days you got to stand up and ask a question. And this is relevant to that one. And he said, I was here talking about a book I'd written, Lexus and the Olive Tree. So it was about globalization, technology. And he stood up and he said, Mr. Friedman, I have a question for you. Is God in cyberspace? Wow. He said, is God in cyberspace? I don't know. I said, I've never been asked that before. And I was really, frankly, kind of embarrassed. And I went home to Washington, and I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi, Tzvi Marks. He lives in Amsterdam. I met him when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem. We stayed friends for a long time. He's married to a Dutch priest, really interesting character, great Talmudic scholar. I called him. I said, Tzvi, I got a question on book tour the other day. I didn't know how to answer. He said, what was that? I said, is God in cyberspace? He said, well, you know, Tom, in our tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. One is that he's almighty, and he smites evil, and he rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure as hell isn't in cyberspace, because it's full of gambling, pornography, cheating, lying, prevaricating, bad talk, and cybercrime. But he said we have a competing view of the Almighty, and that is that God reveals himself, manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. Now, why do I raise this question? In response to that question, it's that one of the things I'm arguing in my book is that these accelerations are creating four new powers that we've never seen before. It's changing the power of machines. They can now think like people. It's changing the power of groups. We as a human species, as a race, are now a force of and in nature. We are driving the climate. It's changing the power of ideas. They accelerate more. But most of all, it's changing the power of one. What one person, one terrorist, can do now, one ill-intended person, is something we've never seen before. So in 1945, we entered a world where for the first time one country could kill us all. It was us. We demonstrated that in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But we didn't worry about it so much because it was us. Well, now we live in a world, or we're approaching, where one person can kill us all. But at the same time, we're in a world where all of us could actually fix everything. Because of this acceleration in technology and globalization, we are standing at a crossroad we've never been at before. One of us can kill all of us, and all of us can fix everything. If we put our minds to it now, we could actually feed, house, and clothe every person on the planet, or close to it. And what's the differentiation? What will define the two? Why do I go back to this question, is God in cyberspace? It's all about values. And values, what people believe, will matter more than ever. And this is the point where I know that you nudge your spouse or your neighbor and say, when you pick up my book, and you believe we paid $32.95 for this. But my most important piece of advice is the first lesson you learned in Sunday school. And that's the golden rule. We now live in a world where so many people can do unto you, and we can do unto so many others, farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. And therefore, if the golden rule doesn't make a comeback, we have a real problem. Because the power one is so great. So what people believe matters more than ever. And it's again why I go back to healthy communities. Because healthy communities are the foundation of healthy interdependencies, and healthy interdependencies are the foundation of healthy values. It will matter more than ever.
The next question from our audience is the title of your recent book, That Used to Be Us. Sounds like you might agree with Donald Trump that we need to make America great again. What do you say to that?
That's very clever. What I have to say to that is that I wrote a whole book about how to do it. I didn't put it on a hat. Okay. One of the really dangerous things about this moment, about the whole Twitter, Facebook, whole universe, is it really rewards laziness. It rewards intellectual laziness. Twitter is a giant smart aleck machine. You won't find me there because I know it has its good sides too. But people can get a lot of attention being smart alecks, taking other people down, but not building anything. And we're seeing a demonstration of how incredibly lazy you can be and how far you can get in a national election when each one of your positions, whether it's on Obamacare or how to deal with immigration or how to grow the economy and not have a deficit, each one of your positions is no more than 140 characters.
Political rhetoric aside, is ISIS really a greater threat to U.S. national security than a rogue nuclear North Korea?
Well, it's a good question, and the scary thing is they may be both. That is, ISIS may one day be a rogue entity with a nuclear device or a dirty bomb. So I have covered every Middle East war personally on the ground, every major one since 1979, except this one. First war I can't cover. You can't go to Syria now. ISIS has a department for chopping off the heads of journalists. I did go to Raqqa province, actually, before ISIS took over. I tried to put myself out there. But even Arab journalists won't dare cover ISIS. So this is, for me, this is new. This is the first war I've never covered. And that really bothers me. But it also makes me humble. And this organization is something I've never seen before. It's wicked smart. Wicked smart. Wicked and smart. And if they could light up a couple in San Bernardino, California, to do the terrible things they did, who's to say who they can light up in Karachi or Islamabad with their hands on nuclear material? So my attitude toward ISIS, I have a little disagreement with President Obama on this, is that I wouldn't hype them. But I'd be very careful calling them the JV team, because I'd be careful about what we don't know.
Got several questions from the audience about journalism and the future of journalism, which got somewhat of a boost last night with the Oscar win for Spotlight, highlighting the Boston Globe's Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation. And a specific question was given that so much journalism now is driven by speed and clicks and advertising, drama, how do we support good old-fashioned contextual journalism on global issues that helps enlighten the citizenry?
Buy the New York Times, $29.95 a month, and online. I'm really sorry to hear what's happened to the paper here, that it's so shrunk. We were talking about it beforehand. No, the only, I'm half serious, and that is support good journalism wherever you see it. And if it's a local website that's really doing good journalism, find a way to support it. If it's the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, find a way to support it, because we're a dying breed. Big global papers that actually have correspondents around the world, and try to edit news, and we make our mistakes, but to do it without fear or favor, and to do it as professionally as we know how. You know, there was just the 100th anniversary of the Pulitzer Prizes, and so the New York Times had a dinner, and my publisher asked me to speak, just about my experience at the paper, because I've been at the New York Times now for 35 years. And I'm so privileged to work for a paper that is still family owned. It's really the last major paper family owned by the Sulzberger family. And they're a remarkable family. And I told this story that I was hired by our current publisher, Arthur Sulzberger Jr.'s father, Punch Sulzberger is his nickname. And he sent me off to Beirut in 1981 with a New York Times tie, or 1982 actually, with a New York Times tie. He was a wonderful man. For the last 35 years, I have covered the most neuralgic issue for the New York Times. I've been probably the person who's written most about this issue, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is nothing more neuralgic, nothing more sensitive for the New York Times than that issue. When Punch Sulzberger died 2 years ago, they produced a special in-house newspaper in his honor, and they asked everyone who wanted to write a story. And I wrote a story making this point, that I worked for the paper for 35 years. I've been probably the principal person in those 35 years writing about the most sensitive issue to the paper, the thing it gets the most mail on. And to this day, I have no idea what Punch Sulzberger, the owner and publisher of the New York Times, thought of my coverage. He never once said to me, "Tom, could you be a little nicer to the Israelis? Tom, you've been too hard on the Palestinians." Do you know what a privilege it is today to work for a newspaper that gives you that freedom? That's what Spotlight was about, by the way. So, thank you. And I consider that an applause for him and that family, because without the Sulzberger family, we're all working for USA Today.
Several questions from the audience about, in addition to ISIS, the whole situation in Iraq and Syria, and the potential threat to the Mosul Dam, but I think this one is on the minds of several of the questioners. And what can you speculate what the Middle East would look like today if the Iraq War had not happened?
It's a good question. And I think about that a lot. I was among the liberal hawks who supported the Iraq War for democracy reasons. So something I've had to live with and wrestle with and think about, and have never run away from. I'm afraid it would look exactly like it looks right now. Iraq would have ended up in the same state as Syria. That is, there would have been, I believe, a revolution led by the Shia majority, just the flip of Syria, which is led by Iraq was a Sunni minority ruling a Shiite majority. Syria is a Shiite minority ruling a Sunni majority. And I have little doubt that it would look exactly the way it is now. That doesn't mean the Iraq War was right. That doesn't mean had we done it a little bit better, it all would have been okay. I've kind of come to the conclusion that it was all just a bridge too far. That the leaders of Iraq and Syria and Egypt basically wasted the last 50 years. They predated on their countries. They brutalized their citizens, and they brutalized them so much. One thing we know is battered children often don't make good parents. And these are incredibly battered citizens. And it turned out as soon as they got into power, they became batterers in too many instances. And so I have to say I am stumped and depressed. And if you follow my column, you know I don't write about it much, not because I don't want to, it's because I'm humbled. I don't know what to say. I don't know how this is going to come out. You just hope that eventually it'll end the only way it can end, which is the way the Lebanese Civil War ended in 2014. And that was on the motto of, sorry, that wasn't 2014, it was 1985. It was no victor, no vanquished. That's the only way these wars can end. Anyone who thinks the Sunnis in Syria are going to defeat Assad and impose their will on the Shia in a stable way, the Alawites, is completely fooling themselves. And anyone who thinks Iran and the Shia are going to impose themselves on the Sunni of Iraq is completely fooling themselves. The only way these places can stabilize is the way, I'm sure it was 1989, the Ta'if Agreement that ended the Lebanese Civil War. And that was on the principle of no victor, no vanquished. We have to share power, and the minority gets overrepresented so it will feel comfortable. In that case, it was the Christians of Lebanon, who were 30% of the population, but got 50% of the seats. So look, I wish it would be different. I had really hoped, I was for the Arab Spring before there was an Arab Spring. My hope for Iraq had nothing to do with WMD. It was all about democracy. And can we find a way to manage this pluralism in some other way than an iron fist? But I have to say, what I really learned, and the great and tragic lesson of Iraq and Syria was, we thought the alternative to authoritarianism was democracy. And it turned out to be disorder. And if you read the pieces we've been running in the Times the last 2 days about Libya, Obama made the same mistake. He decapitated Gaddafi, didn't put anything on the ground, any boots on the ground. And instead of democracy, we got disorder. And now the great divide in the world is no longer between east, west, north, south, communist, capitalist. The great divide in the world today is now between the world of order and the world of disorder. All these countries that are being hit by this hurricane, those with straight lines, and can't generate the institutions you need to manage this kind of acceleration. Basically, what I see happening in the world is that weak states today are exploding, and strong states like ours, their politics are imploding. That's what's happening. The Republican Party is imploding because it cannot manage these accelerations anymore. The British Labour Party, same thing is happening. You see this with nationalist parties all over Europe. And I am convinced that we're going to get a real eventual reshuffling of the deck of politics in all the industrialized democracies. And those who get to hybrid first, doesn't mean one party, but it means two parties that can work together and come up with the best hybrid solutions. They're the ones that are going to thrive. I was at Intel today and got to meet with Bill Holt, one of their top chip designers. And he said something that really stuck in my mind because I was there for my book to just go over my chapter on Moore's Law. And he said, Tom, we're just at the beginning of this acceleration. And I said, it reminds me when I was at IBM working with their Watson team on the Watson part of my book. And John Kelly, who ran the Watson project, gave me my favorite quote for the book. He said, Tom, when you get a new car and on the rearview mirror there's a sticker, objects in your rear view may be closer than they appear. That belongs on the front windshield. It's the stuff coming at us that is much closer than it appears. And therefore, getting your politics right, I think, is going to be the great governance challenge. And right for me is, I did a column about my own politics right after New Year's. And I identified myself as a nonpartisan extremist. So my own personal politics is I'm actually to the left of Bernie Sanders and to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, okay? What do I mean by that? I am for single-payer national health care. I am for a minimum income tax, for minimum income in this country. I'm for pre-K, universal pre-K education. I'm for all those things. I'm also for doubling the research budgets of every national lab and every NIH, every national hospital. But to pay for it, I want to eliminate all corporate taxes, all personal income taxes, and replace them with a tax on carbon, sugar, and bullets. Okay? So I'm to the right of the Wall Street Journal, and I'm to the left of Bernie Sanders. That's my hybrid. And I welcome all you to define yours. But don't feel you got to be locked into one party anymore. Because it's the communities that get to hybrid that are going to be able to manage these accelerations. And what we do in Washington are wedges. They don't do hybrid, they do wedges. The two parties define wedge issues to separate themselves from the other so they can raise money. And that's why they can't get to hybrid. Certainly not now. And that's going to be a real challenge.
You talked.
It's okay.
You talked some about countries and how they're dealing or imploding on some of the political issues. We've just had elections in Iran, which is not long after the deal that was signed. There's several questions here about that. What are your thoughts about the deal and then the elections? Do they show us where the regime is headed?
So I supported the Iran deal, and I'm happy I did. And I think hats off to President Obama. Look at this. Obama made a bet, and it's going to be a long time to determine if he won. But he made a bet that if I can keep Iran away from a bomb for 10 years, open Iran up to the world, that we can begin to tilt its politics and the balance of power inside Iran to more engaging with the world and less mischief in the neighborhood. And it's kind of cool that in the first election since that deal, the reformists wiped out the opponents, the hardliners in Tehran. So good for the president, I say that. Hats off.
You talked a little bit about climate change earlier. We had several questions on climate change. This one was intriguing. the BBC has taken a strong position against giving airtime to, quote, marginal opinion, unquote, including climate change denial. How do you think the U.S. media should approach that?
I'd be for the exact same thing. We don't put quack doctors on TV, you know. Why should we put quack scientists on TV, you know? Really, you know. If you're a doctor and you want to go on TV and say smoking doesn't cause lung cancer, do we put you on the air? No, we don't. That's what they call settled science. So is this, you know.
Our last, our last question of the evening comes from a sixth grader at Southwest Charter School.
These are always trouble. These are always trouble.
What do you think the next generation's biggest issue will be? Nice, easy one to close.
And thank you very much. It's a wonderful question, and I really have to go back to what I was saying in the conclusion. I think the challenge for us is going to be resilience. How to be resilient students and citizens and workers in a world that is being shaped by these multiple accelerations at the same time. And I think so much of that is going to be about all the stuff that's old and slow. I repeat, you know, where I started. All the stuff you can't download. All the stuff you can only do face to face, one at a time, over time. And not everything old and slow is good. Racism is old and slow. Sexism is old and slow. But everything good and enduring and sustainable has to be built old and slow, one at a time. Good teacher to student, good parent to child, good neighbor to neighbor, good participant to good PTA meeting, good city council, good involved citizens, all that stuff that you can't download. And I think if that makes a comeback, we will have truly resilient citizens with healthy interdependencies. And, you know, I did the opening of the Rocky Mountain Institute in Amory Lovin's wonderful Climate Environment Institute in Basalt, Colorado last week. And I got to interview him. And Amory's been one of my environmental teachers. And I said to him, Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And he said, I'm neither, because they're both forms of fatalism. They both somehow assume that it's all going to be either all right or all bad. He said, I believe in applied hope. Okay. I'm hopeful, but I understand that it's not fated to work out. It's not fated to fail. It will be about what I apply. So my advice to that sixth grader is be an agent and a driver of applied hope. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you April 1st for Reza Aslan. And thank you for your support for the World Affairs Council. Good night and a safe journey home.